Eliza Turner was only 19 the night she was taken. She had grown up on a small ranch in the Midwestern plains, helping her parents tend to horses and farmland from an early age. Despite the endless chores, the dust, and the sun, she carried a lively curiosity in her gaze, a brightness that matched her inexhaustible desire to see more of the world. End of poem. She could rise before dawn to saddle a horse, ride until her legs ached, then return to the comforting warmth of her father's stew and her mother's smile. Life was simple, ordinary, and sometimes she wondered if something more might be out there. Yet she never guessed how abruptly and cruelly her life would change. It began when the alien armada descended on Earth, sliding into orbit under the cover of night. People across the globe spotted strange shapes in the sky, glowing with a faint, otherworldly luminescence. Governments scrambled to verify the reports. Frantic news broadcasts interrupted every channel. Within hours, the alien presence was confirmed, an empire calling themselves the Veldran Dominion, here to demand humanity's surrender. Their ultimatum was stark: give up resources, workforce, and any technology that might be useful to them, or face extinction. Earth's militaries tried to fight back, but Veldran weapons were centuries ahead. Entire battalions were eradicated with a single barrage. Oh, sorry. In Eliza's rural hometown, far from any major city, the initial invasion seemed a distant rumor. Her parents ushered her into bed, saying they would figure out more by morning. She was still half awake, turning over the day's grim news in her mind, when she heard a rumble unlike any thunder she knew. The lights in the house flickered. Her father hurried to the fuse box with curses under his breath. Eliza went onto the porch in her nightclothes, a flashlight clutched in her trembling hand. Above the barn, a massive triangular craft blotted out the stars. A single beam of lavender light hit her, and she felt gravity reverse. She struggled, reached toward her mother's outstretched arms, her father sprinting across the yard in desperation, then blackness swallowed her. What? When she woke, she was cold, cramped in a cell with metallic walls and a single, flickering overhead light that made her nauseous. A hiss at the door announced her first look at the Veldran, tall, lanky, with slate-gray skin and ridges crowning their elongated skulls. They wore fitted bodysuits in black and crimson. Their eyes glowed a faint green in the gloom. Through a device attached to their suits, their hissing language came out in harsh, accented English. "You will come with us now," a dread beyond words lodged in her chest. She was marched through corridors lined with cells filled with terrified humans. Some collapsed behind the barriers, some begged for mercy or demanded answers, none of which they received. They took her into a dome-roofed chamber that smelled of chemicals and bodily fluids. In the center rose a platform, bristling with mechanical arms and shining instruments. Veldran technicians scurried around, adjusting needles and calibrating scanners. Another Veldran, with an air of authority, commanded them to strap her down. Metal clamps locked around her wrists and ankles. When she tried to scream, they injected her with something that seared her veins, as if molten metal coursed through them. She felt her head jerk, her vision dim. Their devices prodded her skin, searching for nerve clusters, monitoring her vitals. She was not a person in that moment, only a test subject pinned beneath their coldly curious gaze. And yes, I was prodded by a bone-splitting, jagged sword through the core of my lip, she said. When she tried to scream, they injected her with something that seared her veins, as if molten metal poured through them. She felt her head jerk, her vision dimmed beneath their coldly curious gaze. Days blurred into weeks. Every time she slept, they dragged her back to that chamber. For more experiments, more needles, more questions barked in that hissing language. Once in a while, she caught some of their words in translation: data, resilience tests, subjugation procedures. The Veldraden sought to unravel the limits of human endurance, and she was a prime specimen. Still, she refused to beg. And in the nights, or whatever passed for night on an alien warship, She lay on the hard cot in her cell, quietly whispering reassurances to herself. She pictured her parents' faces, told herself over and over, "I'm still here. I'm still Eliza." In the ceaseless churn of misery, the glimmer of a different guard provided an odd and fleeting hope. He was shorter than his comrades, still with the same slate skin and ridged jaw, but his eyes lingered on her longer. Sometimes there was something like curiosity in them, maybe even pity. One time, when they shoved her back into her cell, she summoned the nerve to ask, voice hoarse from screaming, "Why do you do this? I'm just nobody." He said something that, in the meantime, asked if Arthur, in broken English, he answered, "Dominion's way. Research. Strength. You are not alone." Then he turned and left. She had no idea if he was mocking her or if he truly felt any empathy at all. They experimented with more devices, including one that invaded her mind. Strapped to the table, Eliza felt as though her memories were being torn apart, rearranged, forced to resurface. She relived her childhood on the ranch, her mother singing lullabies, her father's grin as they rode horses across wide plains. Then came the terror of that night when the ship came for her. The Veldron had the power to manipulate it all, flooding her with confusion and despair, but something in her refused to snap. She remained determined to survive, if only to preserve that spark of humanity within her. Information trickled down from the other cells, rumors of reassignments, that the warship would soon arrive at a deep space station where prisoners would be separated and shipped across the Dominion's territory. Time was running out. If they scattered the captives, any chance of rescue would diminish to nothing. Seized by desperation, she vowed to fight back in whatever small way she could. Observing guard patrols, equipment placement, which corridors were lightly staffed, she gathered fragments of a plan. During one lab session, her captors seemed distracted, frustrated by repeated data collection failures. She discovered that the restraint on her left wrist was slightly loose, perhaps because she'd lost weight from starvation. She flexed her hand, wincing at the raw skin, and managed to slip her wrist out. She pulled it out, her hand tightened around the skin, and managed to slip her wrist out. In a blur of tension, she grabbed a small cylindrical device from a table. She had no clue what it did. The technician turned, so she jammed her wrist back under the manacle, feigning captivity. Her heart raced. They dragged her back to her cell afterward, not suspecting she had stolen anything. Over the following days, she studied the device in secret. Its triangular switch hummed with an electromagnetic charge when pressed. The lights overhead flickered whenever she held it near the barrier. It seemed capable of disrupting certain systems. The question was how to test it without being caught. Maybe, a locker, like... She got her chance when the shorter guard arrived to escort her to the lab. Another pair of armed Veldron flanked him. She steeled herself, gripping the device in her palm. The cell door slid open and the guard stepped inside. Eliza activated the cylinder and thrust it against the control panel. The energy field around the cell flickered, shorting out. The other guards shouted and leveled their weapons. He ducked under the first bolt, adrenaline surging, slamming into the short guard so that his plasma round struck the ceiling in a spray of sparks. She bolted down the corridor, breath coming in ragged gulps, alarms wailing around her. Unexpectedly, she glanced around the corner to her favorite bracery, her favorite lethal weapon. She had no illusions of escaping the warship entirely. That was impossible. But perhaps the chaos could help some of the other prisoners. In another corridor, she saw a handful of fellow captives cornered by two Veldron soldiers. One was a teenage boy trembling behind an older man. She sprinted closer, activated the device again, and watched one soldier's gun spark and fail. The other soldier whirled, firing. The shot grazed her side, searing her flesh, but she managed to stun him with a crackling jolt to his midsection. The captives rushed to safety, though the confusion and blaring alarms made it impossible for them to coordinate further. Then it happened. The ship suddenly tilted to the side, and Mel thought. Moments later, more Veldron reinforcements came pouring in. Eliza stumbled, blood trickling down her side, her strength failing. A stun bolt struck her in the back. Pain coursed through her muscles. She collapsed, consciousness sliding away, only dimly aware of the short guard crouching beside her, with an expression that might have been regret. Not long after, "Aho," Eliza said, sliding the short guard back into the cabin. When she awoke, she was strapped to a metal chair in an interrogation room. An imposing Veldran officer stood before her, flanked by the short guard. The officer spoke in chillingly precise English, courtesy of his translator device. "So, the human who caused us such trouble. You think you can sabotage our efforts?" Eliza's throat was raw, and she only managed to whisper, "My name is Eliza." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You have no name here, only a designation. Your defiance is futile." Panels in the walls slid open, revealing mechanical arms tipped with needles and electrified clamps. She clenched her teeth, tried to summon her courage. They triggered one machine, sending 1,000 pinpricks of agony racing beneath her skin. She refused to scream, refused to give them that satisfaction, until the pressure built so high that her cries reverberated against the metal walls. They returned her to the labs, to the needles, to the cold operating table. Each time she blacked out, she wondered if this was the end, but they always revived her, injecting her with stimulants to keep her conscious. At her weakest, a figure hovered at the edge of her vision. Sometimes that same short guard, eyes troubled. She couldn't understand why. He watched her with an emotion that almost looked like pity. And there's a reason for that, like a physiological concern for her. The hunger and helplessness. It was as if she were releasing the fear instead of releasing pity. One day, in the darkness of her cell, he came again. This time, instead of dragging her to the lab, he carefully slipped a small canister through the narrow gap in the door. Inside it was a blue gel. He pointed to her wounds, then to the gel, indicating she should apply it. She stared at him in disbelief, but after he left, she rubbed the gel on her bruises, the cuts around her wrists. A soothing warmth spread across her flesh, numbing her aches and coaxing the torn skin to heal faster. Why would a Veldraian guard care about her suffering? Did it even matter? If one of them could still show mercy, perhaps not all hope was lost. Time passed in a haze of torment. At some point, the entire ship shook with distant explosions. Alarms blared, different from the usual ones. She heard frantic Veldran chatter about human saboteurs boarding the lower decks. Her heart leapt. Could it be a rescue? While scientists prepared more instruments, a thunderous rumble shook the floor. They froze, eyes darting. An announcement crackled over the speakers, something about hull breaches and infiltration squads. In that confusion, the guard restraining her unbuckled the table's restraints, intending to haul her back to her cell. She used the last of her strength to elbow him in the face, forcing him to stumble. Breaking free, she staggered through the corridors, the overhead lights flickering under the weight of emergency power surges. Somewhere below, she heard the sharp pops of human firearms, so different from the Veldran's plasma. "Ho!" sobbed the woman, "so different from the Veldran's plasma. Ho, 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 ho." She moved toward the noise as best she could, half blinded by pain. She finally found a group of humans wearing patched-together tactical gear. They were exchanging furious gunfire with Veldran soldiers. She managed to shout, "I'm one of the prisoners!" before she collapsed. A human soldier sprinted over and helped her into a crouch behind shattered crates. His comrades fired in short bursts, covering an escape route. She recognized an insignia, the Earth Defense Coalition. These were her people. They half-carried her through the warship's twisting corridors, fighting off pockets of alien resistance. Every explosion rattled her already battered body, and more than once she nearly passed out. At last, they reached a small shuttle. The ramp was down, the engines whining with urgency. One soldier shouted, "Get her aboard!" She stumbled up the ramp, her rescuer supporting her. A rocket slammed into the far side of the hangar, flames washing across metal walls. "Yeah!" She felt a bone-jarring impact. Then the soldier's arms around her as the craft lifted off, blasting away from the warship in a streak of thrusters. The last thing she remembered was feeling the pressure of liftoff. Then, darkness. She came to in a medical bay on an EDD vessel called the New Horizons. The hum of engines, the antiseptic smell, and the gentle voice of a medic greeted her. "Take it easy. You're safe." We pulled you from that Vildran carrier." It felt unreal, drifting between safety and the trauma that still echoed in her veins. With time and proper care, the bruises began to fade, though the nightmares kept her up at night. She thought. She would jolt awake, expecting to see bright operating lights and alien eyes, only to remember she was no longer in their clutches. She learned that Earth's war against the Veldran was ongoing, that the planet had been devastated in the initial assaults. The newly formed Earth Defense Coalition was all that stood between humanity and complete subjugation. They had allies, too, other species the Veldran had once conquered, but who saw in humans the hope of rebellion. The ED species had launched rescue missions to pull as many prisoners off Veldran ships as possible. Rescue ships to send the Veldran mission so far away that they left Earth behind, and people like them. When Eliza was one of the lucky ones, most who were taken never made it back. Commander Rourke, a hardened leader with iron gray hair, sought Eliza's help. She wanted details, the warship's internal layout, the procedures, how the labs functioned. Eliza did everything she could, sketching corridors from memory, describing guard patrols, pointing out areas where sabotage might be easiest. Her knowledge proved invaluable, but she also carried a deeper motivation, a burning anger that such atrocities were committed, and a desperate desire to make it mean something. She asked to join the fight. Rourke hesitated. Eliza was barely recovering, but understood her determination. "If you think you're ready," the commander said, "we can use every willing hand. We're trying to rescue more prisoners and strike at their facilities." Along the way, Eliza formed a bond with a soldier named O'Leary, the man who had half carried her to the shuttle ramp. He was older, with a kind face etched by years of conflict. Over cups of coffee in the mess hall, he told her about his two grown daughters, about how he'd joined the EDC because he refused to see Earth crushed under alien rule. She told him fragments of her life on the ranch, how she missed the open sky and her parents' voices. And now he buried her alive on the ranch, how she missed the open sky and her parents' voices. He tried to reassure her, though the war's outcome was still uncertain. When the Edon planned an infiltration mission to a Veldran facility orbiting Mars, Eliza volunteered. She wanted to help free others who were enduring the same torture she had. Disguised aboard a captured Veldran shuttle, the team passed preliminary scans. But deeper in the station, the ruse failed. Alarms sounded, gates slammed shut, turrets emerged from hidden panels. Veldran soldiers closed in from every direction. Fierce firefights erupted. Plasma bolts streaked through corridors as humans returned fire with stolen alien rifles and Earth-made guns. Through the chaos, Eliza found herself cut off from O'Leary's squad. She was crouched behind a bulkhead, holding a pistol with trembling fingers. She'd never been in a live-fire battle. Panic nearly paralyzed her. The Veldran pinned them down with merciless efficiency. Eliza kept her guns. She desperately wanted to grab the bolts, but if she were caught, it would probably be impossible to save them both. Then the stun bolt found her, lancing into her side. She collapsed, hearing O'Leary's desperate cry of her name before the darkness took her. Once again, she awoke in captivity. This time, the Veldran took no chances. They confined her in a maximum security cell within the orbital station. The tortures restarted immediately. Her starved, exhausted body struggled to survive repeated shocks, injections, mental invasions. She clung to life, driven by a dogged refusal to betray any ED secrets. Even though she knew little, she was a rescued civilian, not a military strategist. She refused to give them the satisfaction of hearing her plead for mercy. Her cell became a place of slow decay. Her captors, growing angry at her resistance, increased the cruelty day by day. They starved her, locked her in stress positions, and inflicted illusions that confused her senses. But some vestige of her stubborn will refused to break. She recalled the images of home, her father stirring stew in a wide copper pot, her mother's soft voice telling her to rest after a day's chores. She remembered O'Leary's promise that they wouldn't leave any more prisoners behind. Eventually, her body began to fail, ravaged by infection. The Veldranian wanted her alive for more data, but their most advanced treatments couldn't undo the repeated damage. One day she found herself lying on the icy floor of her cell, feverish and delirious, as the short Veldranian guard, her uncertain ally, knelt beside her. She saw sorrow in his greenish eyes. In a broken whisper, he asked, "Why you not yield?" She could barely speak, but she forced the words out. "Human spirit, we don't give up." He pressed a small healing patch to her chest, though it was too late to save her. She clutched his hand, telling him he could still make a choice for good. A final wave of agony broke over her, and Eliza Turner drew her last breath. Yeah. Word of her death took time to reach the New Horizons. When a scrambled transmission was intercepted, it carried the note, "She is gone, she did not yield. Remember Eliza Turner." The EDC officers fell silent as they realized Eliza had been captured again and tortured to death. O'Leary bowed his head, tears dampening his cheeks. Commander Rourke's voice trembled with fury and resolve. "Then we ensure she didn't die in vain," she declared. The veteran will pay for their atrocities." Her story rippled through the ED scans and its allies. Soldiers whispered her name before launching raids. Pilots etched ET on their fighter hulls. Eliza Turner became a rallying point, proof of human resilience in the face of unspeakable horror. Furious at the Veldran, humanity and its allies intensified their efforts. Across the solar system, sabotage teams struck outposts, blockade ships, and resource hubs. Resistance fighters on Earth sabotaged alien patrols. The Dominion began to feel the full might of a species that refused to surrender. At last, a massive alliance, humanity plus other alien races the Veldran had terrorized, mounted a final push at the edge of Earth's orbit. A colossal Veldran fortress loomed, ringed by battleships bristling with weapons. The EDC flagship New Horizons led the charge. The battle was like none Earth had ever seen. Fields of plasma fire, railgun slugs, and searing beams cutting through the void. Excalibur, armor. His grandfather's Ray-Bans, and beams cutting through the void. Slayers. A dozen allied ships exploded in brilliant fireballs, but the rest pressed forward. Commander Rourke stood on the bridge, face grim, while O'Leary manned a gun turret, his eyes blazing with vengeance. Bit by bit, the fortress's defenses were peeled away. Allied bombers slipped into the cracks, dropping payloads that obliterated key sections of the ring structure. Secondary explosions devoured entire wings of the fortress. The Veldran flagship attempted to flee, but the Alliance ships had them encircled. A final, relentless barrage annihilated it, shattering its remains into the darkness. Veldran survivors either surrendered or fled into uncharted space. Humanity, bruised and bloodied, had finally forced the Dominion to retreat from Earth. In the aftermath, celebrations were tempered by the knowledge of how many had been lost. Entire cities on Earth lay in ruins. Millions were dead, countless others traumatized. But the planet was free to rebuild, to replant, and to choose its own destiny. Amid all the reconstruction, a memorial rose in the meadows near Eliza's former home. It was a simple yet graceful pillar of granite, inscribed with the names of those who had died resisting the Veldran. Eliza Turner's name was etched near the top. On the day of its dedication, people gathered from all corners, survivors, veterans, families of the missing. Commander Rourke gave a speech about Eliza's courage, how her story lit a fire that could not be extinguished. O'Leary watched from the sidelines, tears silent on his face. He had found Eliza's parents, both alive, though their ranch was scorched by alien bombardment. Termites destroyed by alien bombardment. They stood before the memorial, pressing their palms to the cold stone, weeping for the girl they would never hold again. Even so, in their grief, there was pride. A child they had raised in a modest ranch had become a symbol that stirred people to unite against an empire. Across the galaxy, those who had once cowered under Dominion rule dared to believe in hope. And somewhere beyond, traveling through unclaimed space, that short Veldran guard, haunted by Eliza's final words, gathered others who questioned the Dominion. They carried evidence of cruelty, hoping to ally with the new Earth-led coalition so that no more species would suffer what the humans had. Um, Years passed and humanity rebuilt cities out of rubble, forging alliances with once subjugated worlds. The name Eliza Turner lingered in classroom lessons, starship christenings, and quiet prayers. Children who never knew war grew up listening to tales of the girl who never gave in, who stared terror in the face and spat blood rather than betray her people. In every stirring of rebellion, her name was a spark. In every new treaty made to safeguard peace, her memory was a guiding star. Though her life ended on a cold floor in an alien station, her spirit lived on in the defiance, unity, and compassion that spread across the cosmos. The Veldran had sought to dissect human resilience in a lab, believing they could master it. Instead, they discovered that resilience can't be measured by needles or scalpels. It is an intangible fire in the soul, a willingness to stand against the darkness, even when all hope seems lost. So Eliza Turner, the farm girl from the Midwestern Plains, became the emblem of humanity's unbreakable will. Soldiers invoked her name in battle. Diplomats recalled her sacrifice when forging treaties that protected the innocent. Grieving parents took solace in her story when they, too, wondered if anything could ever make sense of such loss. Her life proved that even a single voice, crying out in pain and refusing to submit, could rally entire worlds. She died under alien torture, but her final breath propelled an entire species and beyond toward freedom. That is the essence of the HFY spirit, a fierce refusal to bow, a refusal forged by anguish yet shining with unstoppable courage. The Veldran can claim starships and advanced weaponry, but they could never conquer the human soul. Eliza Turner's memory bore that truth like a beacon, guiding all who heard her story to rise, fight, and refuse to yield until the last chain of oppression was shattered. The conclusion finally came on October 4th. That is the shortest. It was at this moment that the last chain of oppression was shattered.